Hi, thanks for coming. So my name is Tristan and I will discuss the work we did with José Esteves right there on the security of Bluetooth protocols. And this presentation will tackle different Bluetooth technologies. We'll explain what authentication is in the context of Bluetooth protocols, and we'll explain a few security problems we found on these. So José and I work for the National Cybersecurity Agency of France, the ANSSI, in the Wireless Security Laboratory. So we're dealing with wireless protocol security, we're dealing with electromagnetic security, and we also do some signal processing and embedded security. As for me, I'm more specialized on wireless protocol security, and on my spare time, I also enjoy CTFs or software-defined radio. So this is the outline of the presentation. First, we'll see what Bluetooth technologies are. So we have 3 of them. We'll explain what authentication is, how it's provided, and then we'll proceed on the results. So first, Bluetooth. It's a very well-known trademark, but what it is. In fact, you have 3 different technologies. If we're talking about Bluetooth Classic, BT, and Bluetooth Low Energy, BLE, those 2 are communication protocols. The goal is to have 2 devices which communicate together. If we look at Bluetooth Mesh, it's a bit of a different protocol because it creates a network of devices out of single and unprotected BLE links. And the idea of Bluetooth Mesh is to have several devices which represent applications in a network. Bluetooth Mesh applications is typically connected homes. So what about the security in those? Well, if we look at Bluetooth and BLE, it's rather easy. They want to provide confidentiality, integrity, and authenticity of the communications. If we look at Bluetooth Mesh, we also have the 3 properties: confidentiality, integrity, authenticity. But because it's a more complex protocol, it actually creates a network. We want some additional properties like we do not want any device on the network to be able to communicate to every application on the network. So we have some kind of isolation in mesh networks. If we look at how those properties are guaranteed, it's always the same thing. In BT and BLE, it uses a symmetric secret, which is kind of the encryption key, which is used to encrypt communications between 2 devices. If we look at Bluetooth Mesh, we have a bit more keys. It's still always symmetric cryptography. And we have a key to access the network. We have a key to access applications. And we have a key to perform privileged operation on devices. So this is the role of key agreement protocols. In Bluetooth, a key agreement is meant to exchange those symmetric secrets so that devices may communicate. If we look at BT and BLE, the key agreement protocol is called pairing. So you have 2 devices which want to communicate securely together. They do this kind of magic pairing procedure, and they have a shared secret they use to encrypt communications. If we look at Bluetooth Mesh, it's the same thing. The key agreement is called provisioning. When a device wants to join the mesh network, it announces itself. Then the provisioner, which is kind of the master of the network, performs the provisioning with the device. They create a temporary encryption key, and the provisioner sends the network key encrypted with this temporary key. So if we stay at a high level, pairing always works this way. So 2 devices exchange their capabilities, what version of the protocols they support, what cryptographic algorithm they support. And this is used to select a pairing method. Now, they exchange a key and they may authenticate this key. If we look at provisioning, it's the same thing. We still have feature exchange, key exchange, authentication. The only difference is that the provisioner sends the network key to the device in a step that is called key distribution. Now, things start to get a bit more complicated when we look at what's inside, because in BT and BLE there are many pairing protocols, but there are three elements that are used to distinguish a pairing protocol. First, the technology, BT or BLE. Second, is it a legacy protocol or is it a secure protocol? And three, the user interaction, which is required to complete the protocol. So you see that we have a total of 12 different pairing protocols. And there is a catch here, because if you look at the BLE side, you see that the names have been reused, but the pairing protocols are different between legacy and secure. So legacy just works is very different from secure just works. If you look at BT and BLE, you have a second catch, because secure simple pairing protocols are the same as LE secure pairing protocols. So SSP just works is actually the same protocol as LESP just works. Now, for provisioning, we also have different protocols. Basically, there are two differences between protocols: how the key exchange is performed. So it's a Diffie-Hellman key exchange. Is it performed on the BLE channel or outside the BLE channel? And how authentication data is exchanged. You've got two possibilities for the key exchange, 4 possibilities for authentication data, 2 times 4, 8 different provisioning protocols. Now, if we stay at a high level, we can actually notice that all those protocols, they belong to one in 3 categories. So we have a total of 20 key agreements, but if we look close enough, we only have 3 kinds of them. First, we have unauthenticated key agreements, which don't provide authentication. Then we have authenticated key agreements, which provide authentication. And finally, we've got out-of-band key agreements, which the security properties of out-of-band key agreement usually depends on the security of an unspecified communication channel, of the out-of-band channel. Therefore, by just looking at the specification, we may not be able to completely analyze their security. So that was for a short introduction to key agreements in Bluetooth. Now, we are studying authentication in Bluetooth. So first question is, how is authentication defined in the specification? If we look at the BT and BLE specification, there is no formal definition of authentication. And we have a kind of loose goal which is defined, which is that an attacker should not be able to complete a successful machine in the middle with more than 1 in a million chances. And through Bluetooth Mesh, we don't have any authentication definition. We don't have any security goal definition, security goal for authentication, sorry. But we do have some misleading statements like all messages are encrypted and authenticated, which is not true. So, because we don't have a clear definition of what it is, we need to actually take a step back. What do we want to protect? In BT and BLE devices, they expose services. If we take the case of your smartphone, whether it's iPhone or Android phone, you have several Bluetooth services which are up and running when your Bluetooth interface is up. Those services, for example, those are exchange of contacts or the access to your messages. We have other funny services like the SIM access profile to send APDUs to your SIM card. If we look at Bluetooth Mesh, again, we don't necessarily want to protect the communications between the provisioner and the device only. Actually, in Bluetooth Mesh, we more likely want to protect the access to a mesh network and to the applications on the mesh network. And those elements, well, it means that machine in the middle is relevant, but it's not the only way we can attack Bluetooth device, and therefore it's not the only model in which we want to protect devices. So we actually include impersonations, and they need to be taken care of, even though the specification doesn't mention them. So, in this study, we chose a slightly different model from the specification, which is that an attacker should not be able to complete an authenticated key agreement with more than 1 in a million chances. What it means. So, here, take this little image. Imagine you've got devices A and B, they perform the key agreement. They perform an authenticated one, and the attacker somehow finds a problem in it, performs a successful attack. At the end, both A, B, and the attacker have the encryption key. The specification will consider it's a valid attack, and the model in the study will consider it's a valid attack. But you have a slightly different model. Imagine the attacker completes an attack, it's able to impersonate B towards A, but B can't complete the key agreement. The specification technically says it's invalid and you shouldn't be protected against that. In our study, we consider it's relevant. And we've got another slight modification. Sometimes you may be able to complete an impersonation, but you do not get the encryption key. It's much less powerful than the other two, but a good protocol should be immune to that. Now, Bluetooth has not really old technology, but it has more than 20 years. So it has already been extensively studied by other researchers. And so we looked at all the literature and we tried to see what were the common weaknesses on Bluetooth key agreement. So we have a kind of summary table. The weaknesses identified are above. The different key agreements are on the left. And the most problematic thing is that Bluetooth has many different security modes, some authenticated, some not authenticated, which means that you usually have possible downgrade attacks from secure mode to less secure ones. You have also legacy modes which are vulnerable to passive key recovery. You've got a challenge, well, there was a challenge on that at the Quarks Lab CTF. We have some problems already with authentication because usually authentication secret can be brute forced offline. We've had problems with key size because due to export regulation, Bluetooth sets a minimum encryption key size to 56 bits. And we've had a problem on some ECDH implementations. And we have something which is called malleable commitment, which we'll see a bit more later. So this is a complete table for reference. Now, so in this study, we study, well, all Bluetooth protocols, but more likely authenticated ones. There is a supporting paper, but what we did was basically we looked at every protocol and we tried something which is called reflection attack on those. And as you can see, we found many problems on all the different technologies. So first we'll see what problems were found on the legacy protocols, then we'll see a problem on secure protocols, and then we'll see the vulnerabilities in Bluetooth mesh. First, so we mentioned reflection attack. Reflection attacks are literally decades old. So the idea of a reflection attack, a device sends you a message, you send this message back to the device. You do not modify it, you just reflect it. This has usually two goals. The main goal is to complete the authentication protocol, but sometimes you may be able to recover the encryption key after your reflection attack, and sometimes you may not be able to do that. Even recently in the literature, we found some examples of reflection attacks. So there was one problem on TLS 1.3 PSK mode. And there was one problem in another Bluetooth security protocol. It's not included in the state of the art because it's technically not a key agreement protocol that was attacked. In both those cases, the encryption key was not recovered at the end. So, First protocol, Bluetooth. Legacy pin pairing is literally the oldest Bluetooth key agreement. The idea is that the user will exchange a pin between two devices. This pin is used to derive a temporary key. This key is used to encrypt some nonces. So you've got it here, temporary key is K in it. You XOR it with some random values. And after that, well, technically pairing is successful, so you have your encryption key, and there is a final mutual authentication step. The problem here is in the key derivation function. So it relies on an internal function which is called D21. It's specified in the Bluetooth specification. And you see that the key derivation is basically XOR. So, in fact, if as an attacker you manage to spoof the address of one of the devices, you may be able to force the derivation of an all-zero key. So the attack works basically like this. You, as an attacker, you spoof the identity, IDI, of the initiator. You get the random number. You don't do anything with it. You don't know the pin, so you can't get the temporary key K in it. And then you just reflect the nonce, you just reflect the message. And doing so, you will trigger the corner case. The initiator will derive an all-zero key, and that means you got the encryption key. So you are now able to communicate with the device. So basically, the problem in this protocol is that there is a corner case in the key derivation function. It's more of a funny result, really, because the main problem in BT legacy pin pairing is that there is no proper key exchange. So if you actually sniff the communications, you can try to brute force the pin and retrieve the encryption key. Still, it's rather interesting to see a different kind of failure from the Bluetooth specification. And we tested that, and we verified if devices accepted connection with other devices with the same address as them. In all our tests, it worked, and we were actually able to complete pairing between those two devices. But implementations failed at the upper layer. So when we started trying to use services, it failed for various reasons and in ways that depended on the implementation. Now, legacy pin pairing was kind of an outlier. All the subsequent Bluetooth key agreements have used a very common building block, which is called a commitment protocol. This is an example of commitment protocol. So in Bluetooth, you've got your two devices, and commitment is made for authentication. So here, imagine initiator and responder share an authentication secret. The initiator draws a random value. It computes what is called a commitment or confirmation value, and it sends this confirmation value to the responder. Responder does the same. And this confirmation value is computed from the random value and maybe the authentication secret, maybe the address of the devices, maybe, well, basically anything they want to authenticate. And then the initiator sends the nonce, the responder does the same. And if the nonces received match the commitment received, the two devices have mutually authenticated. What is a reflection attack on that? Well, as an attacker, imagine you get a confirmation, you reflect that, you get the nonce, you reflect that. We'll see why it's interesting in Bluetooth protocols. So again, legacy protocols, BLE legacy pairing. So in the table, in legacy pairing, you actually have three different protocols, just works, passkey entry, out of band. But it's really the same thing. The protocol is used to exchange a temporary key. This temporary key is used in a commitment protocol, and at the end, both devices share an encryption key. So this is the entire pairing protocol in BLE legacy pairing. So it's basically the schema from the slide before. It's just that the function is called C1, it's specified. There is a very easy reflection attack in that because both the initiator and the responder perform the same computation. So if you just do a straightforward reflection attack, you complete the pairing, but you don't know the encryption key. Again, it's more of a funny result because the most impactful attack on legacy pairing is that there is still no proper key exchange like Diffie-Hellman, and therefore, if you just sniff the communication, you may be able to retrieve the encryption key. So, this was kind of a warm-up, and we'll get to secure pairing. Secure pairing, there are 4 different protocols, and those protocols are actually the same between Bluetooth Classic and BLE, so they are there. We'll just focus on passkey entry. This is the passkey entry protocol. It works this way, so you've got from a user's perspective, there is one device which displays a passkey. It's a numeric code, it has 6 digits, and the user inputs it on the other device. And both devices will use this passkey to authenticate to each other. You've got the feature exchange step, so they choose to use secure passkey entry. Then they perform a Diffie-Hellman key exchange. Then they perform a commitment protocol, but each commitment uses only 1 bit of the passkey. So they basically authenticate their public key with 1 bit of the passkey at the time. And because they've only used 1 bit of the passkey and it's 20 bits long, they do this 20 times. And there is a final key confirmation step, at the end of which both devices are successfully paired and they share an encryption key. So let's look a bit more closely at the commitment protocol. It's based on different functions depending on the technology, but they have the same flows. So this is the commitment protocol in BLE. Basically, the function is AES in CMAC mode using the nonce as the key. And what's authenticated inside? The initiator takes the X coordinate of its public key, concatenated with the X coordinate of the responder's public key, concatenated with the value of the bit of the passkey. And the responder does the same, but the public keys have been swapped. If we look at known problems on these commitment protocols, we have 2. In 2008, there was a Black Hat conference where Lindell said that it actually did not protect the value of the passkey. Basically, if you just sniff the entire protocol, you are able to recover the passkey that was used. And the second problem is that only the X coordinate of the public key is used. So only the X coordinate of the public key is authenticated. Because the coordinates are swapped, so first initiator, responder, then responder, initiator, if you don't know the passkey, you can't actually do a simple reflection attack. But what if your X coordinates are identical? In that case, you are able to mount an attack, and you can actually mount an impersonation on this protocol. This is an example. So imagine initiator and responder want to pair, and as an attacker, you've performed a machine in the middle. So the user inputs the passkey from the initiator into the responder, and as an attacker, you don't have access to it. The initiator sends you its public key, you just reflect it. Then, because you've reflected it, you are able to reflect all the commitments because the X coordinate is the same between the 2 public keys. And because you know the confirmation value and the nonce, you are able to retrieve the first bit of the passkey in the first commitment round. And because of that, you can, in fact, just exchange your own public key with the responder, use the passkey that you recover to authenticate to the responder, and therefore you are able to complete the pairing with the responder. The idea is use reflection attack with the initiator to recover the passkey, use the passkey to authenticate yourself in the same instance of the protocol to the responder. So this ends with attacker has impersonated the responder. It has an encryption key with the responder, and this works in both Bluetooth Classic and BLE. At the end, the initiator has failed pairing. The problems here is that there are two faults. First, you can actually reflect the commitment protocol and complete the pairing, well, most of the pairing with the initiator, and you can recover the passkey from the protocol. So we tested that again. We tested that on BLE and on common implementations. It works. We used the framework Mirage. We re-implemented the secure passkey entry protocol, and this is the test we made. What it means for Bluetooth security, well, it affects the two technologies. And in fact, it also affects one of the secure pairing protocols without relying on a downgrade, which is something that very rarely happens. Hopefully, it's patchable in implementations because you can see that the value you have is just something that was reflected. Now, we'll look at mesh provisioning security. What is Bluetooth mesh again? So the idea, you have many devices which communicate together in a mesh network, and to communicate they rely on three different encryption key: network key, application key, device key. The provisioning is used to exchange the symmetric secrets and to provide the devices with the needed symmetric secrets to communicate on the network. If we look at the provisioning protocol, it's very similar to what was seen before. You've got the feature exchange step, you've got diffie-Hellman key exchange, and you've got a commitment protocol for authentication. And then the provisioner sends the network key to the device. Authentication depends on the type of thing, but usually you've got, same as for passkey entry, one device displays or sends an authentication value, and the user inputs it on the other device. If we look a bit more closely, we notice a very important thing. The authentication data is put into a field that is called odd value, and odd value, the nonces and the confirmation values, they are always 16 bytes long. That's the specification that mandates it. If we look at the commitment protocol, first both devices derive a confirmation key. Then they use this confirmation key in an AES in CMAC mode with the nonce concatenated to authentication value. Well, we've seen that before. There is a very simple reflection attack. If you, as an attacker, manage to spoof a device, you can actually complete the authentication protocol. And because you complete the authentication protocol, you actually get the network key. So as an attacker, you are able to illegitimately join the network. You've got a variant of that. If the key exchange is not performed inbound, in which case you can still complete the provisioning, but you're not able to join the network. Again, well, we've seen examples of reflection attacks. But there are more problems in the provisioning protocols. First, there is still a problem with authentication secret that can be brute force, but As we've seen, it actually affects all technologies, so it's not a really new problem. It's just applied to a different technology. More importantly, there is a cryptographic problem in their commitment protocol. So I said that all the values, they were 16 bytes long, and the commitment protocol is AES in CMAC mode. Well, AES in CMAC mode is not pre-image resistant, so in fact, when you use it, if you know the key and the proper information, you may retrieve up to 1 block of plain text. This means that we have those two intermediate results. If we know the confirmation key, a nonce, and a confirmation value, we may recover the authentication value. And if we know the confirmation key, authentication value, and a confirmation, we may recover a nonce. We'll see how to combine them. So, here is the idea of the attack. You send your own public key to the provisioner. The provisioner sends a confirmation value. As an attacker, you send a completely random confirmation value. You don't care what it is. The provisioner sends its nonce, and there you can use the first result to recover the authentication value that was used. And then you can use the second result to find a nonce, which makes the provisioner believe that you knew the authentication value all along. And you send that to the provisioner, and that's it. Because the provisioner says, oh, he knew odd value, so he's properly authenticated, so I will just send the device the network key. And in fact, we can also upgrade that to a complete machine in the middle between the provisioner and the device. And therefore, in this attack, the device thinks he's connected to the real mesh network, but is really connected to our mesh network, and the provisioner thinks the device is also connected to the network. So, from a user's point of view, you don't see a problem here, and from either the provisioner or the device, there were no red flags. So it's not like a reflection attack where you see the message you receive is weird. Here, you don't see the problem. And this means that it's not patchable in implementations, and it actually requires a specification update. To test that, so we used Legitimate Provisioner, which is an Android phone with the NRF mesh application. And as the attacker device, we used Red Bear BLE Nano 2. We used the Apache Minute operating system, and we used the BLE and Bluetooth mesh stack, which comes with Apache Minute, which is called Limble, and we modify the mesh stack to implement the attack on the provisioning. So we actually implemented all the cryptographic attack on the provisioning to verify that they worked. And we used, again, a Minute application, which is called BT Mesh. And this is the setup. You have USB to serial converter, you've got the Nano 2, you've got a very quick board for wiring, and you've got the assembled device. So it's rather small. It's this. Short demonstration. So we are on the laptop, and this is the NRF mesh application. This is the connection to the device, and the laptop sends a command to the device. The idea is that the device spoofs a legitimate node, but it's really an attacker device. And the user will try to provision this device and will use a long authentication secret which cannot be brute forced. Let's start it from the beginning. We start the demo, so just the communication. We try to add a new node to our mesh network. We see the device, and we see it's not provisioned, so we actually need to provision it. So we change its address we select static out of band because we can actually put a very, very long authentication value in it. It's not random, but the point is that it's very long. Confirm, and here we see above, we'll see a bit later on, that actually the attack is completed, the device has joined the mesh network, and this is just the provisioner doing some additional configuration stuff to provide the device with the relevant keys. So if we verify, we've got device key, network key, application key, and we can verify that the attacker has probably gotten all the relevant keys to the network. This is the Wireshark capture of what just happened. You see the public key exchange, you see the provisioner sending its confirmation, you see the confirmation of the device, which is all zeros. So technically we can put any random confirmation, but with all zeros, you can actually see that it's not supposed to happen and you're not supposed to still be able to complete the protocol. And then provisioner sends a nonce, and the device sends a nonce that was crafted after recovering the authentication value. A summary on the provisioning protocol. So we've just mentioned it. We have problems on the secrecy of the authentication value, but more importantly, we have what we just saw, which is called the malleable commitment vulnerability, where we can actually send something, anything, and after say, oh, we had actually committed to something. And this something in that case is you think that we knew all along the authentication value. So, quick conclusion. We found this in 2020. We performed a responsible disclosure to the Bluetooth SIG, and we had verified that on proper implementations. And so the SIG assigned to us 6 CVs on the specification. So you have a table of kind of resume of what was there. If we take our table with the 20 key agreements, so we have our key agreements. In blue are the authenticated key agreements. In black circles are the key agreements that are considered secure according to the specification. And in red are the key agreements that were successfully attacked in this study. If we take our more complex table, we've added the column reflection tags because, in fact, we found reflection tags on literally all Bluetooth technologies, all modes. And so we've added the commitment function in Bluetooth Mesh, which is malleable, and the secrecy problems in Bluetooth Mesh 2. As a conclusion to this talk, in this study, we've seen very informative example of reflection attacks on real-world protocols. Usually, reflection attacks is something that you find in papers and that has no real impact because you're not able to recover the encryption key. Here, we've seen on 4 different reflection attacks, and in 3 of them, we are actually able to retrieve the encryption key due to some quirks in the Bluetooth specification. We've seen that numeric comparison, which is a secure protocol, could not be successfully attacked, and actually there is no major flaws in that protocol yet. Hopefully, most of the problems we found were reflection tags, hence they can be patched in implementations. And for Bluetooth Mesh, we kind of show that the authentication of Bluetooth Mesh is broken, and therefore it will require a specification update to modify that. So, Looking forward, we'll see how the specification evolves. We don't have it yet. Maybe they will keep retrocompatibility, maybe they will not. It will depend on what the Bluetooth SIG wants to do with Bluetooth Mesh. Basically, don't rely on Bluetooth built-in security. And if you really have to, try to pair and provision your devices in controlled environments. Thank you for your attention.
Yes, it is. Any questions?
I heard you use the word hopefully twice when you were talking about vendors patching it. So do you have a sense of which vendors are actually vulnerable and which vendors have patched it?
I think there is, well, I'm sure there was a vulnerability page from the third Carnegie Mellon, so you can actually, well, there are all the CVs, all the public statements, and all the vendors, which were affected, which were not. And I don't know if you see which are patched, but in any case, it was more than a year ago, so Bluetooth SIG coordinated the patch for the different vendors, so normally it should be patched.
Yeah, so I have some experience with CERT coordinating the disclosures, and they'll tell everyone, like, here's a vulnerability, and SIG does the same way. But, like, for the implementations that you tested, did you go confirm anyone had actually patched it successfully?
I saw some patches. I won't tell more.
Nice. Any more questions? Okay, that was it.
Not a question, but an observation. When I was doing Bluetooth security testing a while ago, we found, you mentioned there that one of the mitigations you can provide locally is to pair in a Faraday cage, right? Yeah. What we found was if you can spoof an address, you can connect to the target, request a new key, it will then dump the key, and then when the real target comes along, it's forced to do a repairing. So you get to witness the device repairing as soon as it comes within range.
So if I understand correctly, you say that from your tests on real implementations, even though devices were already paired, you were actually able to make them forget they were paired and actually
you can make
repair
one
them.
of them forget, and then, of course, because they don't have a symmetric key anymore, the connection will fail the next time they try and talk.
Yeah, it's a problem in the specification because you have messages saying, "Hey, I've forgotten the key. Try to repair to me." It's definitely a problem, and it's why even though you have paired your devices in a Faraday cage, you may still have an attacker trying to spoof your device. Unfortunately, I don't know if there is any patch for that, but the basic idea is that as a user, if you notice that there is a device which you were already paired to, which is trying to actually repair to you, you can notice there's a problem. I agree that it's not sufficient, that it's not really satisfactory, but you somehow get the information.
Yeah, I just wondered if anyone had mitigated that problem.
No, I don't have any solution to that, and every year we see more publications saying that actually we can also do that on Bluetooth.
If there are no more questions, thank you again. Great talk.